Democracy is a messy affair. It's messy, it's imperfect, and it's the worst of all systems. Except, of course, for all the rest, as was famously said by Franklin, Churchill and others. In many democratic systems, you don't get what you want, you merely get what you dislike the least. For instance, I hate the Tories. I really hate the Tories. I hate the fact that they are peppered with a kind of overprivileged arseholes who've never had money problems in their whole lives and yet still feel entitled to talk down to those whose lives are a daily struggle to make ends meet, usually through no fault of their own, and who, overwhelmed by the pressures of living in a dog-eat-dog capitalist world, sometimes fall by the wayside. There are decent Conservatives, of course. David Davis, for instance, a council house Tory with a commitment to a free and liberal society, who really has lived on the wrong side of the tracks and has been prepared to sacrifice his front bench career on a point of principle. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a deep loathing for a certain type of braying and cosseted but strangely mean-spirited wanker who flies under the banner of the Conservative Party. But as hateful as I find the Conservatives, I despise the Labour Party even more, and the reason for this is simple. The Conservatives will allow you to starve to death in a ditch and not give you a second thought. The Labour Party, however, will scoop you up, tie you to a chair, force feed you, re-educate you on diversity to ensure correct thinking, take your fingerprints and a DNA sample, release you back into society with an electronic tag around your neck, and then charge you for the privilege. So consequently, and often through gritted teeth, I prefer to vote Conservative on the whole. It changes, since the Conservatives are not above adopting the Labour Party's nanny statism, but generally, despite my economic left of centre leanings, my tendency is towards the Conservatives, or rather away from Labour. I know it's a muddle, but as I say, I'm voting for the least worst thing. In consequence, I have to vote for things I don't want, as well as for things I do. Likewise, when it comes to Europe, I'm a Brexiteer. At the time of the vote, I was in two minds, although in my head, despite some misgivings, I had made the decision that I wanted out. The reasons for this are manifold. Immigration is certainly one of them, but perhaps unlike some other Brexiteers, it is not a major reason. Perhaps it should be. A bigger reason is the totally undemocratic trajectory of the entire European project. MPs are elected to the European Parliament in a relatively democratic way, but the Parliament itself, it seems, is nothing more than a puppet and a mouthpiece for the real powerhouse, the European Commission. You can vote out the MEPs, but you can't vote out the commissioners. And this has been an issue certainly since that good lefty, Tony Benn, was shouting about it in the 70s. And it hasn't changed. It is interesting and amusing to me that the left has been getting its knickers in a twist because Comrade Jeremy Corbyn refuses to endorse the European project. And that is laughable, since it seems that the sole purpose of the modern left, as distinct from the traditional left, is to oppose absolutely everything the so-called right supports. In the 70s, the Conservatives were fully supportive of EEC membership, or the common market as it was sold to us at the time, when the Labour Party were much more suspicious of this rich man's club, as they saw it. Support for the EU is now considered a left-wing policy in opposition to far-right and racist, don't forget, Brexiteers. How times have changed. Unfortunately for the idiot new left, Corbyn hasn't, and I have a grudging respect for that. But my opposition to the EU can be summed up in the three words of one of its central tenets: ever closer union. This, and perhaps only this, is the thing that drives the entire European juggernaut. It's empire building, pure and simple, However, like most bad things, it grew from the noble and entirely justifiable impulse to avoid another catastrophic conflict between the two central titans that are France and Germany. And it did, thank God. It did just that. After having butted head 3 times in 70 years, the French finally saw sense and decided to cooperate with their biggest rival. France again assumed its place as a cultural superpower, and Germany did the one thing it was better at than making war: making things. And since the UK had expended a colossal amount of blood and treasure in going to the aid of its fickle ally, Britain welcomed it, and no less a figure than Churchill openly promoted the idea of a United States of Europe. His caveat, of course, was that it was to be for them, but not for us. Perhaps this was the arrogance of the victor, allied with his delusion of the continuance of an empire that was in fact entering its final days. But it was this impulse that kept us out of the conversation for a good 15 years, by which time the architecture of the European institutions was already built, which suited the French perfectly. After realising that access to a common market might actually be a good business, the British belatedly decided to get on the act and applied to join. The French president, Charles de Gaulle, who behaved as if he had never forgiven the British, along with the Americans and Canadians among others, for liberating France, seemed to take particular pleasure in keeping the British out. 3 times the British applied to join, and 3 times de Gaulle displayed the power of non as he exercised his veto. So by the time we got in 1973, the structure was already set. And since we had no say in how things were organised, we had to put our heads down, cough up the considerable membership fee, and keep our mouths shut. But as in any reluctant partnership, it was only ever a marriage of convenience, and certainly not one that was happily entered into. So we bitched and we moaned and we pissed everybody else off. They said we weren't entering into the spirit of things. We said, particularly after it became the European Union, that we had merely signed up to a common market in which to buy and sell goods and services, and not to the ever closer union envisioned by the architects of the 1957 Treaty of Rome. I'm told that the phrase ever closer union is not a legally enforceable edict, but merely a philosophy, and as such is just an appeal to our common European humanity. Perhaps it is, but like a flag and an anthem, it clearly points the way to a destination that I don't wish to end up at. Maybe it's just atavism on my part in being too attached to the nation state that we call Britain, but there it is. Maybe it's just because I'm just too old to change, but then I have felt this way since I was a teenager, so I don't think it's just a product of my age, although I may be a product of my time. But whatever my motives, the decision has been taken. It's done. But it having been done, my resolve to defend the result is only hardened after witnessing the frankly treacherous ways in which it is constantly being undermined. The Prime Minister's so-called Chequers deal, which would leave us as a vassal state of the EU in all but name, is just the latest, if not the most dangerous example. So I'm determined that this decision, the most democratically fair decision that we've ever taken, must be defended and must be enforced. The decision has been taken. Now the politicians need to get on with it. But, and there is a but, there's always a but, and it's a big one. And from my point of view, especially, considering the things that I hold dear, it is as big a but as could be. Because my misgivings, such as they were, centred around the issue of the very nature of the British establishment, and in particular the security establishment, specifically the spies. You might call them the deep state. One of the very worst things about this country is the deeply cynical and controlling nature of the security services. We all love the idea of spying, James Bond in his Aston Martin, fighting evil around the world, is an obvious fantasy. But the code breakers of Bletchley Park probably contributed more in real terms to Allied victory than anyone perhaps except Churchill himself. So they have a good image, the spies, our Cold War warriors, keeping us safe from the communists. And they have done good work, I'm sure. I'm equally sure the average MI5 or MI6 operative really believes in the work that they are doing. We're constantly told that many devilish Islamist plots have been foiled because of the vigilance of these secret and supposedly unsung heroes. I'm sure that much of that is true, and I don't wish to diminish it. But we have to realise what it costs, not in pounds, shillings and pence, but what it really costs. Because what it is costing us is nothing less than our free society. Mass surveillance of the kind that the security services and their idiot cousins, the police force, are constantly demanding more of, is the cost to our society. Those who sacrifice liberty for security, to paraphrase Thomas Jefferson, deserve neither. It is often said, often by Americans when justifying the brutalism of unfettered capitalism, that free people are not equal, and equal people are not free. And that's probably true. But what's also true is that free people are not safe, and safe people are not free. Mass surveillance, as practiced in the United Kingdom, may make us safer, although that's certainly debatable, but it makes us considerably less free. And who understands this? Not the British government, that's for sure. And what's more, they never have. The British government, where matters of security are concerned, are perhaps worse than any other government that isn't actually a genuine tyranny. It's certainly worse even than the United States government, who also seem to have decided to abandon any pretense of America being a free society by steamrollering the Fourth Amendment. For decades, even the existence of MI5 and MI6 were never acknowledged officially, and even their budgets were secret, so that there was absolutely no accountability whatsoever. Even Americans demanded to know where their money was spent. So maybe Bond's Aston wasn't so far-fetched. Who the hell knows? Mind you, in a deliciously charming way, everybody did know where the spies worked, because the bus conductors would announce it as Spies' Corner as they approached Century House in Lambeth, and everybody on the bus would watch to see who got off. But the fact is, our government is really, really bad for that. Just ask Edward Snowden, who details just how invasive our security services really are in Glenn Greenwald's book of his revelations, No Place to Hide. In it, Snowden details just how impressed the Americans in the NSA were when learning of just how much data the British spies and GCHQ had been, illegally I might add, extracting from law-abiding British citizens. This prowess is nothing to be proud of. But whilst we're busy being ashamed of the actions of the British government, there is an institution that we can be proud of, an institution that is actively defending our rights as British citizens, the European Court of Human Rights. Last week, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the UK's mass interception programmes breached Article 8 of the right to privacy enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights. So how can we, the British, be proud of such a European institution? Well, contrary to popular knowledge, the European Court of Human Rights has nothing whatsoever to do with the European Union. Confusingly, it is the European Court of Justice, the ECJ, that is the legal arm of the EU. So we can be proud of the fact that the European Court of Human Rights, an institution whose birth Britain was deeply involved in from the start, continues to actively defend Britain's citizens from its government. Even the ECJ, an institution that has arisen totally from the architecture of the EU, has a pretty good record of doing just the same. In 2014, the ECJ invalidated the Data Retention Directive, which basically allowed the authorities to dip into any and all electronic communication records of the law-abiding public, with the exception of the actual content of the communication, anytime they feel like it. So that meant until the ECJ outlawed it, the origin of the communication, its destination, the device from which it originated, when it was sent, from where, and at what location it was received, and at the exact time, as well as any websites that are being visited, was up for grabs, no matter what the reason, and distinctly and precisely without the need for any warrant, since no probable cause was required in law. So apart from the actual content, electronically, we're all an open book to the authorities, legally, until that is, the ECJ declared that illegal. So good things do come from Europe, and from time to time, really good things come. So in leaving the EU, we may have to do without that break on the powers of the state. We'll still have the European Court of Human Rights, so we won't be completely at the mercy of the British government. But still, considering how voracious our government is for our data, it remains a sobering thought. Despite last week's verdict, which took 5 years to come to court and was brought by Big Brother Watch, an organisation that anyone interested in a free society should support, and whose details I'll leave below, our power-hungry government was already in the process of seeking to supersede this judgment by introducing the Investigatory Powers Act, which passed through the British Parliament in November 2016. So even though the British government's actions have now been judged to be illegal, so determined are they to be able to pry unrestricted into our communications and our browsing habits that they had already brought in new legislation to effectively neuter this current ruling. I don't know the legal ramifications of this case on the new powers, but it appears that their ambition, at least, to know absolutely everything there is to know about us remains undiminished. They won't stop trying. We must not stop trying to stop them. It is your duty to defend your country against its government. So this impulse, I feel, between not wanting Britain to be absorbed wholesale into a completely undemocratic European superstate is balanced by the knowledge that our government, our British government, is far worse in terms of its obsession with keeping us all under surveillance than any comparable European government. It's a stark fact. Our government is worse than theirs. In fact, I'll go as far as to say that the very worst thing about the United Kingdom is its government. Indeed, I will go further and say, as I have done with regard to the police force, that the British government is on the whole the enemy of the British people. They are not on our side. Quite why they're not and whose side they actually are on, I couldn't say for sure. But since power always seeks to maintain itself, the assumption must be that they are on their own side. So what can we do about this? Well, we can support those organisations that are attempting to keep our society free, like the aforementioned Big Brother Watch. There are numerous others, and sadly their number indicates a dissipation of their effectiveness, in my opinion, although Liberty is the biggest and probably the most effective. CCTV Watch is another. Don't spy on us and others steal. I'll try and collate all the ones I can find and detail them below. We can use, or rather we must use, the traditional avenues of writing and petitioning our MPs and MEPs, despite the impression that you may feel, as I often do, that it makes no difference and that they are all in it for themselves. But it's an option and we should use it. Buy and read George Orwell's 1984, which I consider to be, apart from perhaps the Bible, the most important book ever written. Give it to your children and make them read it. In fact, Tell them you'll take their phone away if they don't read it. It's important they know, since the world of the internet and mobile phones and the monitoring that goes with that is all they know. Omnipotent mass surveillance is not inevitable. We can and we should be able to have one without the other. And we should be vocal and argue the case, meet up with others, change the narrative, get involved in local politics. Don't leave it to others. Others will sign through planning permission that gets a CCTV camera installed outside your house so nameless, faceless operatives can peer through your bedroom windows. Even start a YouTube channel for all the sodding good that'll do. They spy on us because they can. They spy on us because they think that we don't give a shit. They spy on us because they think we can't stop them, and they spy on us because they think we have swallowed the lie that the highest virtue for us is to be safe. And for that we are prepared to accept the removal of our freedom in exchange for the electronic leash. Don't accept it. But all of these things require effort, resolution, and some amount of determination. But there's one thing we can do that takes almost no effort whatsoever. It's not much. In fact, it's almost nothing. But it is, crucially, not quite nothing. Even if we really can't be asked to do anything else, we can at least make our resistance and our disagreement and our desire to be free human beings known. And every time we see a camera, we can give it the finger. Or we can do this. Even if, in the final analysis, after weighing up the pros and cons and deciding that it's really not worth the effort resisting our fate as mindless, vacant, empty-headed, enslaved, consuming automatons, then we can at least fucking do that, can't we?